I am so excited to be speaking with Michael Glunk today. Michael used to work in the corporate world, and he slowly started investing in real estate on the side. His portfolio grew to the point where he no longer needed to work. So he said goodbye to his W-2 for good. Now, Michael is given the flexibility to do what he wants when he wants to do it. Michael, welcome to this video. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Thank you so much for having me here, Mindy. I'm definitely super excited to talk with you today about my story.
So when you started investing in real estate, was it with the idea that you would eventually stop working and live full-time off of the portfolio?
Yeah, so that was my intention when I started investing in real estate. And in fact, I took a step back and looked at my goals in life. My goals was to have as much fun with my family and friends as possible and to travel as much as possible. And so I tried to set out and find a way to achieve that. It actually started much sooner, earlier in life. I actually started by just being a diligent saver. And then I actually originally started investing in the stock market. But that eventually over time transitioned to real estate as I saw it the best avenue to really achieve my life goals.
That's interesting that you said you used to invest in the stock market and then you saw that real estate was the way for you. Did you have this idea of pursuing financial independence when you were starting with the stock market?
Not originally, no. So, I originally just started saving money from a young age. And then, my grandfather got me investing in stocks when I was 12. And so, yeah, I know, right? Actually, I distinctly remember this story. Quick side note, when I was 12 at Christmas, he said, "Hey, Michael, there's a present over there in the corner for you, and I want you to go open that one next." And I said, "Okay." And so I walked over, and usually my grandparents would sit on the couch and watch my sister and I open presents. And he followed me this time. So I could tell he was super excited about what this thing was, right? And so I unwrapped this present, and it was a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi. And so I looked back at him somewhat confused, and I was like, hey, thanks so much for the Pepsi. And he's like, no, Michael, turn the bottle around. And so this was back in the day when you couldn't just go online and purchase a stock. You had to actually call the brokerage company. In this case, it was down in Philadelphia, and place the order, right? And so on the back was the transaction receipt for my 5 shares of stock in Pepsi. So that was my first kind of foray into the market. And so, I diligently over time saved money and invested in the stock market, much like anybody else would traditionally try to do when they think about kind of saving for retirement. I didn't necessarily originally have this term financial independence in mind. I was kind of saving for retirement. I think I had that desire, but I didn't necessarily have that nomenclature in my mindset originally to start.
Okay, and I got to ask, do you still own those 5 shares of Pepsi?
Unfortunately, I don't. I did sell. I know. I did sell them, but you have to fuel your real estate adventure in some way, right? And so I need to find the funds.
Okay, I will forgive you for selling the Christmas present that you received that started you down this path. So what was it that you were saving for when you started saving and investing? You said it was for the future and for retirement, but what did that mean?
To me, originally, it just meant, okay, I knew at some point in time I didn't want to work anymore, right? And I know that throughout life, you have to have some form of income, right? So during your working years, you get that typically through working a job. In my case, at the time, it was a W-2 job. But I knew that at some point I wanted to quote unquote retire, right? When I could maybe go and enjoy life the way that I wanted to enjoy it. And so to me, it meant I was saving to get myself to that period, and I was trying to do it as fast as possible. But, at one point in my life, I kind of hit this inflection point. And so I had gotten married. My wife and I moved to Portland, Oregon. I had a new job with Adidas, and we bought our first home. Of course, we did what most typical Americans do. We bought the biggest and most expensive house that we could afford at the time. And which I would recommend to myself now or to anybody else, but that's what we did. And I realized that my current strategy wasn't necessarily there. It wasn't going to get me to where I wanted to reach my goals in that kind of, enjoying myself early and quote unquote, at the time I called it retiring early, but now I prefer the term, financial independence.
So how did you discover the concept of financial independence?
It was, just kind of by accident. I came across this random website. There was this guy, Josh Dorkin, and I started to look at some of this content around real estate investing, and I was like, that sounds kind of interesting. And so that's where I kind of transitioned from this notion of trying to achieve retirement to actual financial independence, because I think, for those in the financial independence movement and also, those with a mindset like my own, once you actually achieve it, it's not like you just stop because you're just wired differently in a different way, right? You have to keep going. I'm not sure if I'm ever going to stop doing what I'm doing because I have so much love and passion for it. And so I think it's a more appropriate term for what I've achieved and what I was originally shooting for.
I think that's really important to note, because just because you can do whatever you want and you can stop working doesn't mean you have to. And there's a lot of people in this space who, I don't know, feel guilty about working or feel obligated to stop. I have a job. I'm financially independent. I still work because I get to work here. It's not really that hard of a job. It's a really awesome job and I love it. So you don't have to retire, but it gives you more options.
I totally agree. And for me, it was really this notion, when it got down to it, is that what I wanted was control. I wanted control over my life and my future. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to leave, but stuff happens, right? Sometimes you're working for a company and they downsize, and unfortunately you're on the wrong end of that, right? I wanted to have control of my future and of my own destiny. And to be completely honest, after I, reached financial independence, I actually exceeded it while I was still in my W-2 job. I didn't leave right away.
That's a very common thing too. It's called one more year syndrome. My husband was guilty of that. I was trying to get him to quit forever because he really was miserable at his job. He didn't like it. He couldn't fathom continuing to work there for the rest of his career, which at the time he was like 35, I think. So he was able to figure out a way to leave the job that he hated and caused him massive stress. My friend that was, I love my job, she got a new boss a few years later and said to me, I understand what you're talking about now.
Totally. I mean, oftentimes you don't leave companies, you leave managers, right? And there's something interesting you mentioned there as well, too, is that your husband was miserable. I find that there's really like two key milestones that are a pretty good indication that you should leave. And one is if it, is causing you mental harm, right? If you're miserable, then it's probably time to move. Even if you haven't reached FI at that point in time, move to another job. Life's too short to be in a position where you're miserable all the time. And the second is, from a financial harm, right? And I found at a certain point that I was harming myself financially from staying in that current role, in that current W-2 position, because I could have made so much more money if I would have just stepped out and pursued my real estate full time. And, when I think back and reflect on this, people don't talk about this a lot, but there's a big kind of mental component to this as well. And it's interesting because during my time in the W-2 world, I was in a strategy department, and I did a lot of research and was an expert in this field called behavioral economics, which is really a mixture of economics and psychology, right? To understand how people behave out there in the world. Put simply, as humans, we're irrational beings, but behavioral economics helps provide some rationality to our irrationality. And so one principle that was affecting me and affects a lot of people trying to achieve financial independence is this idea of social proof, right? So we look to others to guide our behaviors. And, I found myself in that because, yes, I wanted to leave my team in a good spot. But also, you look at, what's the traditional approach? The traditional approach is you go to school, you get a job, you work in that job, you save, and then eventually at some point you can retire, right? And there's this path, this clear path that many people are going down. In fact, it's probably not even a path, it's like a 2-lane highway. And here I was, I had already done the research, I had already done the math, I had already achieved my financial independence, but I was looking down this other path that to me, maybe was a path, it could be like a deer trail, I wasn't quite sure, right? It felt, a little bit more lonely, which is tough because as social beings, we want to follow the crowd a bit. And that's why I think it's so important what you're doing here with BiggerPockets Money and BiggerPockets in general. And what I try to do in a small way with, my YouTube channel is to provide people with examples and continual examples of how people have achieved financial independence. Because, when you think about it, one example is great and it can be inspirational. People might hear my story and think that's great. People might hear your story, Mindy, and think, that's wonderful, but they think that we have some superpower. But we actually don't. It's something that anybody can do.
Let's go back a minute and talk about what your life was like before you started purchasing real estate.
Before I started purchasing real estate, my plan was pretty much I would save as much money as possible. I was always, a saver. I think you're born with certain aspects and other aspects are learned along the way. For whatever reason, I kind of enjoyed saving. I enjoy watching my money grow more than spending it. And so that was just something that was kind of innate in me. And so I would save, I would contribute to my 401k. And then once I got, increase my income a little bit, I would actually max out a Roth every year. and then I would continue to invest heavily in my 401k. And that was my basic approach until, as I mentioned, I kind of hit that inflection point when I got married and bought my first house, and I started to think about, okay, well, if my goals in life are to have as much fun with my family and friends as possible and travel as much as possible, how do I achieve that sooner in life?
And so you started investing in real estate. What was your first purchase?
Yep. So my first purchase was in Portland, Oregon, where I was living at the time. I purchased a rental just north of where I lived, and I self-managed that one, which was definitely a learning experience. I also then a year later bought another one in Montana, which I had managed by somebody else. And so I kind of had both things going on there, where I was able to get some experience working with a property manager at a distance, as well as managing a property firsthand on the ground. And so that was my first foray into real estate investing. At this time too, I was trying to figure out what exactly was going to be the best path for me. So I did try multiple side hustles. Real estate is where I started and eventually ended up. But when I moved from Oregon to Colorado, I also had this small stint where I tried an additional side hustle on the entrepreneurial side, where I started a small outdoor apparel company. But not long after I started this company, my wife got pregnant with our third child, and then eventually our third child was born, and I shifted from, basically, man-on-man coverage to zone defense, and we were outnumbered by our kids. And, time is our scarcest resource, and, I had to make some choices. And again, going back to my goals of wanting to spend as much time with my family as possible, I had to make some decisions. So at that point in time, that's when I realized that, okay, I sold off my fledgling apparel company and decided to really focus in on real estate and focus all of our efforts into that. So much so that every extra dollar we were making was going into our real estate portfolio. We actually stopped contributing heavily to our 401ks and just contributed enough to receive the match.
Okay, so because we usually talk to people who are reaching financial independence through investing in the stock market, they rely on the 4% rule, which says if you need $1 million, if you spend $40,000 a year, you would need $1 million in retirement, or approximately 25 times your annual spending. How did you determine that your portfolio of real estate holdings could sustain you through retirement?
A relatively similar approach. So I'm one of those guys that I figure out what the goal is and then I reverse engineer it. So, in the end, what do you need? Well, you need income, and you need income for life. So whether you're working a W-2 job, you're self-employed, or you're living off of income from some other source like rental properties or from investments. And so in the end, there's this quote unquote monthly income that you need. And so you're essentially doing that when you think about it from an investment perspective, using that 4% rule. You're figuring out what you need to live off of, whether it's for the year or for the month, and then figuring out the amount of money you need to have in your portfolio to then achieve that via the 4% rule. So similarly, for me, it's cash flow in the real estate world. So I figured out, okay, how much income do I need? And so from in the real estate world, that transitions into cash flow. So what is that number? And then how many properties do I need to achieve that cash flow amount, right? And this can vary too, because people a lot of times in the real estate world like to talk about units, but to me, that's somewhat irrelevant. Certain properties can produce more cash flow than others. And so for me, initially I wanted to hit a certain amount of cash flow, and then that was going to give me the confidence to be able to leave the W-2 world. And so once I hit that number and then exceeded it, obviously it was a no-brainer that I had the flexibility to leave. As we've discussed, it took me a little while to actually take that jump.
I love that you brought up units versus cash flow, because 3 units might get you to financial independence, and it might get you $300 a month in cash flow. So looking at units only is not the right way to go. In terms of your monthly spending, how much is your portfolio bringing in? Is it completely covering it? Is it covering it plus? Or are you counting on appreciation and maybe some sales to kind of boost your income or your nest egg?
Yeah. So, originally it was, far exceeding the amount that I needed to live off of. So it was covering all of our expenses and then some. The reality is I'm at this stage of life, right, where I've got young kids in the house. I still have, another 8 years until my youngest leaves the house and goes off to college. And so I don't mean to sound negative, but I'm kind of stuck. I'm in this situation, right? And so I might as well do something. And as I mentioned too, my personality is that I always have to do something. So the nice thing about my real estate portfolio is that I can always adjust it. And so I've actually ratcheted back and have created a little bit less cash flow because I sold, I had a certain portion of my portfolio in properties in Michigan because originally I was trying to go after cash flow. And so I bought a lot of properties out of state in the Midwest. And so, I just recently sold all those properties at the end of last year and moved those dollars to a property in Montana that I think will eventually bring me more cash flow in the future, but also will bring me more appreciation. And so originally and earlier on, I was like, okay, I need to achieve a certain cash flow goal. And that was my focus for real estate. But now, as we know, there's many factors in real estate that provide you benefit. There is appreciation, cash flow, there's amortization, so paying down your mortgage. And then also, there's a tax advantages, right? And so I originally exceeded my cash flow needs. Right now, I would say if I needed to live off of it, I could 100% live off of it. But because, again, I'm not going to just go off and travel the world quite yet. My wife still does as well too have a W-2 job. And we have some income coming in from that as well too. And so we have the flexibility that if we wanted to, she could totally quit her job and we could do nothing all day and live off of the cash flow. But since we would probably go nuts sitting at the house staring at each other all day, and we want to continue on, and she really likes her job and I really like what I'm doing, we've kind of adjusted the portfolio to go after appreciation and really grow our net worth, knowing that at any time we can make some adjustments to ramp back up the cash flow if we want, but it's already at a stage where even if we stop today, there's enough to keep us going.
Okay, and that's all of that sounds like you've thought about it. You're not just guessing, you're not just winging it. Oh, I think I could probably get by with this. It sounds like you've really thought about it. You've run the numbers, you've looked at everything, and you have made a conscious decision. So while the Michigan properties may have continued to give you cash flow, I love what you did and said, I'm not just going to sit here. I'm going to get rid of these now because they've done what they needed to do. And I'm going to look at a different option, especially because your wife has the W-2. So the how do I phrase this? Loss of cash flow from Michigan, transferring to Montana, maybe not making as much cash flow now, but it's an appreciation play. Now you don't need to so much worry about that because your wife is covering you, for lack of a better phrase. That's a terrible phrase. I totally own that. That was awful. But
no, two key points there, right? So one is like any investment, and particularly my real estate properties, I always look at the ROE, so the return on equity. And at a certain point, it makes sense unless it's something that you're emotionally attached to or something that you want to use. At a certain point, your return on equity gets to the point where it makes sense to sell it and put those dollars into something else or other properties to help work harder for you. The second piece is we have it set up where, like I said, both of us could stop working today and we could live off of the cash flow from the rentals. But again, it's kind of not in our DNA, especially at this point in life. And so we want to continue to accelerate things. And so we have that flexibility. And my wife knows, and she can go to her job every day, despite loving it, knowing that if something happened and she didn't have that job anymore, we're totally fine. Likewise, if I didn't do anything else in real estate, we're totally fine. But we also have that comfort that helps to fuel us in the day-to-day and knowing that, if the proverbial what hit the fan, we're still in good shape.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's a huge mistake to make a decision on a whim. And it doesn't sound like this decision was made on a whim. This decision was made consciously and full of thought, which is the point I want to hammer home to people that are watching this, because you can get yourself into a lot of trouble on a whim. And you can, I'm trying to think if I've ever known anybody who made a really great decision spur of the moment.
Yeah, I don't know of anybody either. And I agree with you. I mean, I've always been calculated. Again, I've tried to, avoid risk and do things that I feel are safe and make me comfortable. And part of that comes through obviously education. The more you're educated on something, the more comfortable you feel with that particular topic. But that's also why even once I started to dabble in some of these other side hustles, I still stayed true to my original approach of maxing out my 401k as well as my Roth because, again, there was no point in just making a knee-jerk reaction, jumping to something else. I still knew that was a good thing to do. I just was trying to optimize it and find something better. And I didn't change until I felt good about what that better thing was.
I love it. Absolutely. Could not agree more with everything you just said. What is your biggest takeaway from pursuing financial independence that you would like to share with our audience?
Before I get into that biggest takeaway, first kind of two bits that are like ante to the table. One is what I just mentioned, right? You have to be okay with delayed gratification. Also, too, when it comes to financial independence, right, you have to spend less than you're bringing in. Those are just kind of like ante to the table. But I think the one thing that I'd like to share, and the one key learning that I think, to be honest, is pretty crucial, regardless of if you're approaching financial independence from, the stock market perspective or entrepreneurship or real estate. And it's going to sound simple at first, but it's that you should just focus on just one thing. Too many times I see people that they get overwhelmed, right? They slip into this analysis paralysis. There's so many options out there that they never actually even get started at all. And so, look, the reality is, like, yes, you shouldn't go in blindly. You should do some research. And odds are, if you're listening to this podcast, you've already started to do some research, right? You already have a general idea of some things that you're interested in. So, create a short list and then pick one thing that you think is the best in that moment and go with it. Don't worry and overanalyze it to determine if it's the absolute best thing. You're going to grow and evolve along the way. The reality is, if you want something to happen, you're going to find a way to make it happen. If not, well, then you're just going to find an excuse.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. Yes. I want to underline everything you just said. Focus on one thing. And that's not to say that in the beginning, when you're not quite sure what you want, that you can't look into a bunch of different things. But once you decide, if we're going to do real estate, what kind of real estate? It's not just all real estate, because you're going to go crazy trying to learn. If you don't understand what you're doing, you are going to lose money. And that is a guarantee that I can promise you. You need to educate yourself about what you're doing. So focus on deciding which aspect of real estate you want to pursue, and then dive deep into educating yourself about that and making sure that that is truly what you want to do. But you're right. If you have all of these different ideas, you are going to get analysis paralysis. You are going to figure out, I don't know what I want to do. I'm just going to learn more. And then all of a sudden, 3 years have gone by, 5 years have gone by, and you own 0 houses. If you want to buy real estate, buy real estate. Buy it educated, buy it with somebody who knows what they're doing. But if you want to be a landlord, the most education you're going to get is by being a landlord. And that does not mean buy the cheapest house. Oh my goodness, I can go on a tangent forever about that, but I'm not going to, because this isn't my show, it's yours. And I'm just going to say, I 100% agree with you. And if you forgot what he said, rewind it and watch it again, because that was really, really awesome.
Thanks, Mindy. Thanks.
Okay, Michael, thank you so much for your time today. This was so much fun, and it's always good talking to you. Is there anywhere that our audience can find you online?
Yep. So they can find me on my YouTube channel at Michael Glunk. And if they want to reach out or connect with me, they can do so via my website, michaelglunk.com, or on BiggerPockets.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And if you like this video, please click the thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more inspiring fire stories just like Michael's. This is Mindy Jensen signing off.